What's up, everyone? Today I'm going to revisit this Zelkova forest that I've been working on for a few years, see what I can do with some spring cleanup. All right, well, it's early May, and as you can see, this thing is getting going for the spring. And so today I'm going to do the same thing that I did about a year ago, and that is basically go in and just kind of cut off all the long shoots. I might do a little bit of pinching. I'm going to basically be kind of trying to throttle back the really strong trees while allowing the ones that are still working on leafing out to catch up to them. And in the process of doing that, I'm going to basically be removing the long shoots and removing a lot of the leaves that are up here in the upper part to make sure that there's enough light getting down into the center of the composition. When I'm working with Zelkovas at this stage, it's interesting because the amount of scissor work that goes into this just becomes really, really high. And it might end up taking me the better part of 2, 3, 4 hours to just scissor off the majority of the shoots here. And then I'm also going to have to come back later in the spring or early summer and do a partial defoliation to make sure that the interior and lower growth gets caught up in terms of the light to this upper outer growth. Pruning this didn't take quite as long as I was expecting, but it did take me probably an hour. I removed all of the long shoots, but I also, because the leaves on this particular one were kind of large, I'm actually not really sure why, I went ahead and scissored most of the leaves on the top of this tree in half, or even cutting off 2/3 of the leaf. And that's basically for the same reason as I'm trimming the shoots. I'm trying to maintain some balance here and ensure that there's not too much shading of the lower growth. So went ahead and thinned everything out. Now that I've got this done, let's take a quick trip down to the greenhouse and see a couple of other examples of working on Zelkova at this time of year. Just like the older forests that I have, I am trimming these back, and unlike that one that's been outside, these guys have been here in the greenhouse, so they're already, this is the second time I'm trimming them, even though it's only May. And they're really heat-driven plants, so I have to keep on top of them. If I let the shoots run too much, then I end up with coarse growth, and I'm just trying to make a lot of fine twigs. So this is one that started off as a clump of seedlings, and it still is sort of a clump of seedlings, but if I'm going to differentiate the size of the trunks more, then I'm going to need to let some of these run while keeping control over the others. So I might just pick a couple here in the middle to allow them to run a little bit more and let those continue to fatten up while I continue keeping the other ones under control. The first time I worked on these this year, I actually had Nikii just strip all of the leaves off so that I could see the structure. So I'm not going to do that again yet, but in another month or so, I probably will come back and remove at least from these clumps that I'm training as forest, remove at least the top half, just like I do on the older forest. I turned off the fan, but the fan next door is still like going.
Well, it's a good thing that that is closed. Yesterday, I had this one guy who just kept trying to visit me, and he was determined my name was Amanda, and that I'm from Australia. And he just kept talking to me. And he just, are you sure you're not Amanda? And you're sure you're not from Australia? I'm like, it hasn't changed.
Does it sound like I'm from Australia?
I'm like, it hasn't changed in like the last 5 minutes. Have you been there? I'm like, no, I haven't been there. Well, are you sure? I'm like, I'm positive of where I've traveled and where I've lived and who I am, and none of those things have changed. And then he's just like, well, why isn't your roof black? I'm like, why isn't my roof black? And he's just like, well, greenhouses, sometimes they're black. I'm like, no. I'm like, they're not black. He's like, well, sometimes, you know, like they do it and they completely make like a whole blackout room. I'm like, are you talking about light depth and you're growing marijuana? He's like, oh, so do you know how to grow marijuana? I was like, that's completely different growing things, and sure, I can grow anything that anybody wants because this is what I do for a living. I'm a horticulturist. I'm like, but no, this is a greenhouse. Well, how does a greenhouse work? I'm like, oh my God, why is this happening to me?
Can't you see that I'm working here?
Yeah, and I kept going back, and then he'd start talking again, and I'm like, okay, have a great day. And then I just go back, and then I'd be like, oh my God, what do you want? Like, and the guy was really nice, but he just really wanted to talk to Amanda from Australia. Kind of like that one. Okay.
All right, Nikki, so tell us what you're doing to the Zelkovas.
I am pruning back the Zelkova, and I'm trimming off any dead leaves and any dead branches, and trimming it back so it can bush out and be like a cute little compact tree.
All right, so like show us like where are you cutting it back?
I'm cutting it back to a couple leaves off the top. I'm pinching it back.
And how many of these have you trimmed in the last 2 days?
A very good question. Hundreds? 1,000? Not quite sure. All these babies.
All right, well, as you can see, it's all about the same for Zelkova, whether you're doing like a little broom or a forest. There's a lot of quick pinching and cutback that has to be done, especially in the spring. And the hotter climate that you live in or the hotter conditions that you have, the more you'll have to do repeated cutback on the Zelkova throughout the year. Thanks everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed that. We'll see you next time.